Hello, welcome back to Flat Caps and Classics, and first of all, thank you for subscribing. If you've already done that, the numbers of subscribers are going up. We're getting some great views to the channel, so thank you very much. I'm having a ball doing this, but actually we're taking a break from the rebuild of the green 77 Roadster because I am aching to get the engine and the gearbox back together again and getting them in the blue one. I'm hoping within a few days the blue GT will be up together and running. That's the plan anyway. So far I've cleaned the engine off, and in the last video when I gave you a quick tour of the GT, I needed to change the crankshaft oil seal. I've done that. The flywheel's back on, the clutch is back together and back in now. That's a new clutch assembly, so I know that that's all good. And I've degreased the engine. As I say, I'm not painting it. We have got a new rocker cover to go on here as well, so it will look a bit better. And I've cleaned it all off, cleaned the surfaces ready for the new exhaust gasket and things like that. And we've got a new thermostat and a new thermostat housing to go on. But that can all be done when it's in the engine, and this is what I really want to achieve today, is getting this lump back in that lump so she's starting to look more like a completed car. So the first task clearly is getting this back on there. So she's in. Let me just get these tightened up, and then we'll turn around and start putting her in the car. So I'm sweating a little bit. Harriet's sweating a little bit. Yeah, that's my daughter, by the way. Harriet's sweating a little bit, but the engine is far more in than out. And I'm thrilled. A lot of huffing and puffing. We didn't, I think, at the moment, actually I'm not going to say it because I'm not going to tempt fate. I'll tell you what I was going to say afterwards, after it's all in and buttoned down. I've got to put the engine mounts on now. Now, there may be some of you saying, oh, you've done it the wrong way, and I hope I haven't. But I had such a nightmare getting these things out. These are brand new, but such a nightmare getting these things out. I'm hoping that, you know, I've got the engine virtually in place. I just need to bolt these down. The steering rack is out on this car. To get the driver's side engine mount in, you've got to take the steering rack off. I know, go figure. But it's given me a good shot. It's given me a good opportunity to rub it down and give it a coat of paint. So that's nearly ready to go back on. But we're nearly ready to get this actually buttoned down. The gearbox is on a jack underneath the car at the moment. I'm going to worry about that in a minute. I just want to get the engine mounts on. You'll be able to get the next one on. You live in hope. Right, there we are. The engine is in, loosely, but it's in. Mounts are on. I need to bolt the mounts together. I need to bolt them through the bulkhead, which I will do. The gearbox is only being propped up by a jack at the moment. So again, we need to sort that out. But hopefully by the end of this film, gearbox will be in properly, engine will be bolted down. We can start building her up, getting her ready to go. I tell you something, my trusty workmate that I've had for years is breathing a sigh of relief at the moment because the engine's been sat on it for the last goodness knows how long. Now it's just the gearbox support that is sitting on it. So the car's up on the ramp, engine and gearbox are in, as you've just seen. Nothing is secured at the moment. I've still got the nuts to go on to the engine mounting brackets or the engine mounts themselves, and we need to support the gearbox, which at the moment is just resting on the main cross member of the car, which is handy because it doesn't mean we can get it up on the ramp to work without getting filthy dirty lying on the floor. But it also means that we've got to get this on. And this is a bit of a kit of parts, really. Not only have you got this main cross beam, which has two bolts or two holes either end for bolts to go through onto the car, but you have a suspension unit which has bushes on there, which goes in at the same time, and I bought new gearbox mounts. So they go into the brackets here. This whole thing then goes on there, and the whole thing in turn, then that's secured underneath with a couple of bolts. And there are bolts here that bolt onto the gearbox itself. So the whole gearbox is held firm, whilst at the same time having a little bit of freedom with these rubber bushes. So my job now is to get this all together and get it onto the car. What I've realised is that I've taken that cross beam off now because there's absolutely no way I'd be able to get a socket or anything to tighten the bolts up there. So I'm hoping that I'll tighten these up, and the same on the other side. So this is the mounting. I've still got the suspension on there, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to basically bolt that on, okay, and get a socket in there or a spanner of some kind in there to tighten this up. But we'll see what happens. It's a bit trial and error at the moment, but we're winning, and that's the main thing. Well, it's great news that underneath, basically, there's a bit of wiring to still do and the speedo drive to put in, but underneath everything's in, which is really, really good news. So it's on to the, well, dare I say it, the nicer parts. I'm still waiting for the special nuts that hold the exhaust manifold on, so I'm still waiting for those to arrive. So unfortunately we can't get the exhaust manifold and therefore the carburetors and all the bits and pieces that are on with that. But I'm going to do that. I'm not going to video that because the main point of these videos is actually to highlight the green one, not the blue GT. But we've got things like, this was the old water pump from the blue one, and when I took it off I noticed that it's really stiff. It has eased off a bit now because I've been doing that quite a bit, but I didn't like it, so I've got a nice new one to go on. And actually, as soon as this arrived, I realised it's so much easier to turn. It's just going to be more efficient for the sake of a few quid. Then I just wanted to get a new water pump, so that can go on today. And also the big bits, such as starter motor, which I know works perfectly okay, so I'm looking forward to getting that on today. And the alternator can go back on the car. But the first job, and you'll remember when I put the engine in and we put the engine mounts on, I said that on some cars you need to take the steering rack off to put the engine mount in on the driver's side. We had to do that on this one. So after a quick refurbishment, I can put this thing back on. Putting the steering rack on is really very easy. I've got two new track rod ends to go on as well, but we can do that once the steering rack is on the car, and you can see it's very easy. You've got 4 holes here, top 2 with captive nuts on, and the bottom 2 with that are just open, and I've got clearly the corresponding nuts and bolts there, and it slides into the knuckle joint there and tightens up, and again I've got that nut and bolt to go through. So really it's just a question of wiggling it about until it goes in. there we are. That's the bottom of it done, which is great. I meant to say it slid in really easily into that knuckle joint, and copper slit was something that a very good friend of mine told me about many years ago. I mean, it's great for putting on nuts and bolts, and whenever I put the nuts and bolts back on when they're in the engine, I will use this because it's anti-seize, and it actually, when I covered the top of the steering rack as well, it just makes it easier to slide in. So I've just got the bolt to put in to tie that down, to tighten that down at the top of the steering rack, and then we're on to changing the track rod ends. 17 turns to take that off. This actually, that nut unscrewed an awful lot easier than I thought it was going to, which is wonderful. So that's the old track rod end taken off, and you can see that the rubber seal in there, the rubber dust cover in there, is basically it's disappeared completely, although that actually doesn't feel too bad. But again, in safety first, and it wouldn't pass an MOT without this cover on there, and actually that is a lot more, that's got a lot more, hasn't got as much give in it basically as the old one, so it's better that we change them. 17 turns it took to get off there. The last thing we want to do, because the car, when we last drove it, drove straight, the last thing we want to do is to be driving all over the road. We want to get the tracking as near as possible, though I will get it checked properly when the car's back on the road, and to be able to get these wheels back straight again. The trick is to count the number of turns it takes to take the track rod end off. Now in my case it was 17, so hopefully 17 turns on and it should be in roughly the same place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Okay, so we've got 17 there. Just take that lock nut off there. Lock it into the wheel hub itself. And this takes a bit of manhandling because you've got to get this through. There we are. Well, the checklist of the rebuild, or the putting back together, is getting shorter. Thank goodness. There are more ticks in the boxes than there are empty boxes now. The track rod ends have done, as you've seen. I've just put the starter motor on and wired that up, so that's ready to go, thank goodness. I've still got to put the wiring in the gearbox, but I will do that when I get back under the car, when I'm doing the exhaust and things like that. I'll check on all that. So really now it's working on the top of the engine, thank goodness, because this is when it really starts to come together. First thing I want to do is put the new water pump on. Nice to put something nice and shiny and frankly clean on the engine. New gasket, always use a new gasket, but I'm sure you know that already. So it's just a question really. I've taken the bolts out, I've made a note of where those bolts are. I'm going to put them back in using some copper grease as well. So just line the, there we are, the gasket up there, and pop it on. Now I'm putting these back in the same order. The bolts are going in the same order they came off. So we'll put that one, I've done it clockwise. And again, you know, the way I normally do this is everything in loosely, make sure it's all in there. Make sure they all fit and they're all, that none of them is cross-threaded or anything like that, and then tighten them up until they're nice and snug. And there we are. And the final one under there. Now what this will also do is, the new water pump has the hole in there, the bracket if you like, for the alternator, so that will be the next job that we put in, the alternator, and she'll start looking much more like a car that's nearly ready to go. gasket's in there properly, that's properly seated, so that's good. So important when you're building back an engine is to make sure that she gets as much of the water through as well as the oil, of course. We haven't done the oil yet, haven't put the oil in yet. Right, they're all up as far as I can go, so let's just start. Nip these up, and there we are, water pump on. That's really good news. Okay. Got the dropsies this afternoon. That to me looks a bit short, but we'll go with it for now. It's certainly the one that was in it before. Yeah, I'm not sure that that's the right bolt for there. So what we'll do is we'll do a quick swapsy. Let's take those off. Copper grease is fabulous, but it ain't half messy. There we go. Right, let's put that there. I don't know about you, but I've got so many gloves, and I start off wearing them, and they just get in the way no matter how. No, I don't mean the sort of plastic disposable ones, that's better. I don't mean the plastic disposable ones, I mean the ones that are really very good, but they just end up, there's nothing like, you know, when you can actually, you've got the tangibility of feeling the thread with your fingers, for example, and things. So I'm doing great business with Swarfiga at the moment. I don't know whether don't know what you call it if you're from anywhere else, if you're watching this in the States or anywhere. But you know, the big sort of gel that you put on your hands afterwards to get all the grease off. The only problem is I'm running out, and you know, we are still in lockdown here, and I hope you're keeping safe and staying at home, as the various governments around the world have told us to do, quite rightly. When I run out of my dose of Swarfiga, I don't know what I'm going to do. Good old soap and water is wonderful, but it doesn't quite do it. Right, I just need to tighten those up. Now, on the front of the water pump goes the pulley, and then onto the pulley bolts the yellow plastic fan in this particular car. But, as you might be able to see, this pulley is really, really manky. I could rub it down and give it a blast of paint, but I'm lucky enough to have a shot blast cabinet, and if you don't have one of these, they're well, in the UK they're probably 150 or 200 pounds for a good one. You'll need an air compressor with quite a sizable tank, and mine does it, but you'll hear it coming in, kicking in and creating quite a lot of noise fairly soon after I start this. The blast cabinet is fantastic. It makes light of all of this stuff. A couple of minutes blasting this with some grit, with some media blasting, and that will come up. All the paint will come off. It's not damaged in any way, and it's certainly not, there's surface corrosion on there which will all come off. A couple of coats of primer, a couple of coats of paint, and that'll be ready to go back on the car. Now that should be, it gets a bit dusty in there, a bit dusty out here as well, there we are. Well, it's really crabby, now needs just a quick scuff over with some rough sandpaper, slightly smoother one, and then that's ready for primer and for paint. Good, I think I'll take it home to do that. One thing about that media blasting, it is brilliant, but it does get absolutely everywhere. It does make everything quite dusty. Next on my list This is the thermostat housing, and I need to clean this up. It is very crabby. I've got a new thermostat and a new gasket ready to go on there as well, but I would probably be mind-numbingly boring for you just to sit there and watch me put stuff in the shot glass cabinet and then clean them up and bolt them on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to continue building the engine, get the exhaust manifold on, get the exhaust on, the carburetors, start plugging everything in as it should be, and then, hopefully then, we'll be ready to start her for the first time in about 3.5 years.